I was looking for a job in Melbourne, um, running up to the 1956 Olympics, and I tried everything, and then I thought out of desperation, I'll see what's going on at the Tivoli. And I went to see the show several times, and then I thought I'm going to write this lady a letter to see if she needs any assistance. The Tivoli circuit was a vaudeville variety house in those years, situated in Burke Street, just up from Swanston Street, going up the hill. Um, and it also had a theatre here in Sydney, down in Castlereagh and Campbell Street. Um, it its performance policy was like twice daily, uh, and they would be doing um, 8 shows a week, um, or more, depending on the business, but mostly imported acts, uh, interspersed with big production numbers. That was the sort of basic policy that they adhered to. So bringing in a company like Catherine Dunham was very unusual for a Tivoli audience to suddenly be confronted with this exotic Afro-American dance company. But it actually did quite good business, which was extraordinary. Um, and so I thought, well, I'll go and write to her and see if I can get a job. So within a week, I got a letter back from her secretary, whose name was Marjorie Scott, saying, would you like to come in and talk to us? So I went in backstage, scared as hell, thinking what the hell is going to happen here. And because I could type, I got a job answering her fan mail, which was quite prolific at the time, mostly with complaints about how she treated live animals on stage, which was all furphy, really. The end of the first act was a Caribbean number, where they cut the throat of a chicken and drained its blood into this bowl, and the natives were very restless, etc. And the curtain came down. That was the end of Act One. But a lot of people thought it was for real. So I used to write letters back to these people saying, this is only make believe. We do not really kill a chicken each day. Thank you very much. So I used to do that. But then her husband, John Pratt, who was an American designer, production designer, said to me, are you interested in looking at any of the workings of backstage? And I said, yes, I am very interested. So I was taken under his wing in terms of how the show ran and what was required and all of that. And they had, because it was coming up to Sydney, they had a stage manager from here called Durham Marcel, who was quite famous in those days as the major stage director for the Tivoli circuit, and also as an SP bookie off the side. He just, unusual sometimes on race days at half hour, he'd say starters and riders for the first race. This is your half hour call, But he was stage managing it, and he eventually taught me how to run the show. And so between the Melbourne season, which transferred out of the Tivoli up to the Princess for 3 weeks, because the Tivoli was being refurbished for the Olympic Games and a new review. So we moved up to the Princess for 3 weeks. Then we came to the Tivoli in Sydney, where the season here was astronomically successful. I mean, they were hanging off the gallery, seats up there. It was really wonderful. And so gradually I got to take over the stage management of the show. She was a remarkable woman, not only an anthropologist, but also a very qualified choreographer and administrator. And she ruled that company with an iron fist, discipline-wise, for the dancers and all of that. And it was not unusual, because she appeared in quite a few of the sequences in the show and the scenes in the show, that if she saw anything wrong when she was on stage doing what she was doing, she'd send someone off with a note saying, that spotlight on the number 3 spotlight bar's out of action or something, so she had eagle eyes to what was going on. And the one thing that she did teach me was that you could always tell if your in that particular show if the lighting was correct by looking at the floor to see where there were patches that should have been lit that weren't lit, there were problems, you know. So that was something that was very valuable for me in the future, you know. But we had an extraordinary time with her. That company was absolutely fated in Melbourne and Sydney. And then we did the big tour in New Zealand, and I don't think New Zealand at that time quite knew what they were getting. And it went on up into Asia, where the workload was horrendous in venues that were not theatres, old cinemas, no facilities, you know, really shocked. Because it was the theatres were basically bare walls, you know, so it all had to go in. It wasn't until we actually got to Tokyo that we were actually in a proper theatre with you know, automated equipment and lighting systems that were all sort of, you know, push buttons, forerunner of what was to come, you know. But yes, so I learnt a lot from her, and in handling the 35 singers and dancers, and I remained, when I left after Tokyo, remained friends with many of them for many years. I think I'm probably the only survivor now. I think they've all gone. But it was for somebody who'd come out of an education like I'd had, you know, turned up a job of being an accountant in my father's office, and then gone into Melbourne without a job, saying, what am I going to do, you know, and this turning up was quite extraordinary. Quite an extraordinary thing. I remember going to the reopening of the Regent Theatre in Melbourne because at the end of the war, someone dropped a cigarette in the dress circle and the place burnt down. And they reopened it 46 or something like that to with this movie, I can remember the name of it, it's even called, it's called The Home Stretch, with an actor called Cornell Wilde. But I remember more about the Regent for the Wurlitzer and the orchestra that came up from the depths, conducted by Stan Bourne, and the voluminous curtains with the coloured lights and everything on them. And so, and I was, you know, 10 or 11 at the time, so that was, you know, and I used to go to a lot of cinemas in Melbourne because my uncle was involved in the movie business as well. So all those sort of signs, when I look back, were an indicator that somewhere along the line you're going to be actually involved in this. And the accounting idea was my father's idea to push me into some sort of career because I was, you know, 17, 18, rudderless. But when I did get a job in the theatre, I think they were pretty shocked, but were happy that it looked like a career that I could make something out of, you know. And I remember the last performance at the Tivoli, Sydney, for Catherine Dunham. I was stage managing it then because I was then taking it into Brisbane on my own. And at the end, Miss Dunham came forward and made a curtain speech saying how much, you know, they'd enjoyed being in Sydney, but they were moving on and they were going to take various people with them. And the one person that we're going to take is this young man who was, what was I, 20? I was 20. Yeah, I wasn't 21 until we took the show into Perth, so sometime later. And she dragged me on stage and said, this young man has become our stage manager at a very young age, and we're going to look after him, and I'm going to teach him everything I know, and I assure his mother and father, who are in the audience tonight, that we will look after him, even though he might be wet behind the ears. Well, you know, little did they know. So that was, you know, that was the beginning of all of that. But somehow, you know, when you talk about the things come back quite clearly in your mind. And we had lots of experiences post getting out of Sydney and touring with that show and all that. And in the end, when we finished, we were the people that came out of Australia and New Zealand who were involved in the company were transported back to the Philippines, to Clark Air Base, which was an American air base. And from there on, we were due a commercial flight from Manila to Sydney or Manila to Auckland or whatever. So we had to wait there. But the minute we left Clark Air Base to go to Manila to see if there was a ticket, we couldn't get back on the base. So we had to be very careful about that. But I got stuck there for probably 2 weeks because she never provided the air transport, never provided the tickets. And I think I discovered many years later, I think from my father, that between he and David Martin, who ran the Tivoli, who owned the Tivoli circuit, and a man called Bill Dooley, who was a bookmaker, but ran the Lord Mayor's command performance at the town hall, they got together and organised somehow to get me out of Manila back to Melbourne. And my father never said anything about it, but I've worked out that that's how it happened. That either they combined their resources with the money to get me a flight from Manila to Melbourne, and then I started work at the Tivoli not long after, so it was all part of a plot with a happy ending. They didn't, they were not able, because they'd gone, to see the revolution that happened when Cameron came to Australia and started producing here, and that huge sort of cycle of success, in that period. But yeah, so in the end, they were very happy, I think. Well, I guess it's the old adage that the show has to go on, You've got a commitment and she's got a contract to deliver, and you just have to get on with it. I mean, it's a commitment that you make, and you're there and you've got an audience waiting. I suppose that's the reason that you're doing it.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, some of those, that early time up there was in Asia was pretty terrible. I mean, at least the theatres here in Australia and New Zealand were equipped. We were in Singapore in a cinema with no facilities. They had to put the lines to fly the scenery. They had to put in, really awful. We were in Manila, the Manila Grand Opera House, where I don't think many people came to the show from my memory. We were there for about 2.5, 3 weeks. The theatre was in a really gritty district, and the facilities were so old, and the weight of all the stuff that we had flying, because most of it were drops, big 60-foot drops that were out of American opera houses, hauling them up, and you could hear the fly rail, the rail used to tie the ropes off, you could hear it groaning, and I thought any minute this is going to give way, There would have been a multi-scene accident where every cloth would have dropped to the floor. But fortunately it didn't happen, but it was really, really difficult.
Did you see accidents in those times?
Yes, a few, yeah.
What kind of?
Where your battens would fly, would be unintentionally released and hit the deck. Nobody hurt, but those sort of really difficult things. Lighting bars, not holding their deads, all that sort of stuff. There was nothing serious on that tour of ours with Dunham that was, a critical accident where somebody got really badly hurt. But luck more than anything else.
Yeah.
And obviously people, who knew their job, the ones that we were touring with. And there was me and a guy called Russ Glover, who was out of the Tivoli but joined me for the tour, and a couple of others who were the sort of technical guys on stage. The actors handled a lot of the props, and once they're set up, you never had to worry about it. But, yes, we were in Korea for the American Army. This is in 1957, so the war had been over by about 3 years maybe, but Seoul was level.
No.
We were staying in a bomb. You could see the bomb shrapnel marks all over the building and everything like that. And the facilities that we were playing in were not indoor venues. They were American 8th Army sound shells put up to entertain the troops when Bob Hope was out there or something, So all he needed was a stage and a mic and a few lights. So we had none of that. It was just the show was too sophisticated to be taken out there and be expected to be in its theatrical form, but she was contracted to do it, so there was no getting out of it.
Mm.
The only thing I got out of the tour was the medal
Right.
from the American 8th Army. People kept saying, "What did you do for them?" But they were great. They were very hospitable.
Yeah.
The food was great, and the American bases and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, that tour was like Korea, and then Okinawa, played there for a week or 5 days or something, and then went back into Tokyo, Yokohama, Tokyo, where we were in proper venues, thank God. Well before its time.
Mm. Did you talk to Japanese at that time about what had happened only 10 years prior? Well, not even 10 years. Oh, 45. Oh, yeah, 10 years prior.
About what?
About the bomb and
No. It's like Faulty Towers. We never mentioned the war.
never mentioned the war.
The Japanese were terrific.
Yeah.
You know, the people working the theatre were wonderful and looked after us and took us to the bathhouses and all that sort of stuff. It was really great. And after enduring Korea for the 8th Army that we had to do, coming into Japan was a real treat. I think everybody really enjoyed being there, you know.
It had recovered quickly.
Yes, yeah. Amazing experience though. I don't think she went back and did much more after that. Ran the school, the Dunham School, the Dunham Technique School,
Yeah.
which I think still exists today. I got onto a website not long ago just out of curiosity to see if there was any name I recognised, but there isn't, you know.
No.
But most of I would have thought one of the dancers I knew really well, John Jones, he joined Jerry Robbins in the early stages of his ballet work. John was well known for his interpretation of Jerry Robbins' Afternoon of a Faun, that little ballet.
Right.
But the others, some stayed here, several stayed here in fact. Antonio Rodriguez opened up a dance school in Melbourne, and a guy called Albert Laguerre married an Australian girl called Jackie. He's gone now, but his son Mark, and he's still somewhere in the industry, Mark Laguerre, but I think either his son or daughter is working out of one of the dance schools in Melbourne. So there's a little bit of that around. There's a lady in Melbourne whose name's Maggie Mansfield, and she was with one of the drummers for many, many years. And she's a very offbeat lady, and she's old now and losing her vision, but she's got the tongue of a viper. But very funny. And I'm still in touch with her. She's the only one that I know, but the rest of them, I think, the Grim Reaper has taken its toll.
Yeah.
But amazing experience that was. I mean, imagine someone being able to do that now.
Oh.
It's incredible. No experience, bar the fact that I could type. And I was taught by John Pratt, her husband, and her, and indeed Durham Marcel, the stage manager for the Tivoli.
Right.
Who taught me the art of stage management.
So he was your mentor?
Yeah. And there were no schools then, but he was my mentor and set me on the road, you know. I suppose at that time going into Williamson that Sue and I would have been the preeminent stage managers in Australia working at the time. Yeah, interesting.
With that thing. Did you feel like you were a mentor to many stage managers?
Yes, quite a few in a way, and in a way I still am with one or two people who are doing jobs now, and others who have been in a show and have become resident director, choreographer. I still have contact with quite a few of those that, ring up and not only give me the gossip sort of thing, but, ask about certain situations and lament how things are at the moment compared to how they might have been. Yeah, but it's fewer and fewer as one gets more ancient. I think it's galloped ahead, obviously, from, back in the 70s, 60s and 70s from Williamson's, where it was pretty ancient and old. And the advent of computerisation has revolutionised the operation of the theatre in almost every aspect. And I don't know enough technically about it nowadays to authoritatively say much about it, but it's obviously had a huge difference. I was talking the other day about the production of Oliver, the original, which was designed by a man called Sean Kenny, and to turn the revolve, there were a couple of guys on a winch at the back, trying to get to its dead and stop properly.
Yeah.
Nowadays, of course, none of that.
No.
Push the button and off you go.
Yeah.
But yes, I think from a technical point of view, excuse me, you have to say it's changed so much.
Hey, what got you to Oklahoma and the start of all that? Because that was a starting point, wasn't it?
Well, it was, but it was preceded in Adelaide, because I joined Adelaide in 1977, and the first thing we did was Reg Livermore's Ed Kelly, which lost a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that was a huge outcry in Adelaide that it had lost $350,000 or something. It never got its investment back. Yada yada yada. And then that was 77, and then we were lucky enough through Kevin Earl, the general manager, to secure the rights of Evita, the Hal Prince production, which was on in London at the Prince Edward. And that was because Robert Stigwood was an Adelaide boy originally, and his mother, Gwen, she was still alive and well, and she became executive producer too. And so that was the first major thing that we actually staged there in 1980. And we had, can you imagine little old Adelaide with Harold Prince, Larry Fuller, the technical team, Timothy O'Brien and Tazina Firth, David Hersey and Malati, some of Abe Burrow, what's his name, with the Jacobs of the Sound, I think, and somebody else with all the film material, which was very primitive in those days, putting this amazing spectacle into Adelaide. I mean, it was jaw-droppingly fabulous. And so I did a recording last year for Channel 7 in Adelaide, which was like, Remember When? They had a segment on the news about that opening night, and they'd had archival clips of chats with Robert Stigwood and Harold Prince and all those sort of people, and how fabulous the party was at this hotel in North Adelaide, which went till dawn, people staggering out saying, oh, the sun's up, what are we doing? But that because it set up, for us, we had to set up a workshop to actually build the set, and that was the beginning of what became the Dry Creek Adelaide Festival Centre Trust workshops.
Oh, okay.
And that opened the door with other producers, particularly Cameron, who saw what Adelaide could do. And you've got to remember that Williamson's was no longer, so there was no central house that could actually produce all of this stuff, and so that's how, once Evita got underway and was a terrific success in Adelaide and on tour, Cameron eventually came with the idea of doing Oklahoma. And that was the first venture with him, and the beginning of his Australian, not quite the beginning, but near enough to the major beginning of his Australian operation.
What had he been doing in London before
that? He'd had varied success with things like Side by Sondheim, which won, and there's another show that he started off with that didn't do that well. I can't remember the name of it now. But Oklahoma came from him via a production that he'd mounted with I think the Arts Council or something in England, that ended up opening out of town and then coming into London. And that was the beginning of his major London success, I think. He thinks he did like tomfoolery out here, those sort of things before launching Oklahoma. But Oklahoma was a major success here, produced by Michael Edgley and the Theatre Royal here and Adelaide. And of course, starred John Dietrich and a whole host of people, some of whom are still out there doing it, Directed by Jamie Hammerstein, Oscar Hammerstein's son, who was a terrific man to work for, wonderful personality, calm, knew what he wanted, and all of that. It was very easy to get the show on. It was great. Agnes DeMille's sidekick, a lady called Jemsy Delac, came out to do the choreography.
Best name.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So that was the beginning of it, really. And that in Adelaide was followed by Song and Dance in 1983. And then, of course, came the big one that revolutionised it all, was Cats.
And everything changed.
Age 5 and everything. Just went from there. And that was really the beginning of Cameron's major time here in Australia. So, Cats opened here in July '85 at the Royal, and the idea was that the top ticket price was going to be $30, A reserve. People in the industry said, "You're wasting your time. You'll never ever achieve that ticket price." Well, of course, 6 months later or whatever, it went up to 39. We'd achieved it, and then some. So that was the beginning of how ticket prices increased and the desire of audiences wanting to see these productions, and it sort of gradually got up from there. Cats, of course, did 2 years or something here and went on to Melbourne and beyond, always with excellent business.
Yeah.
And closely followed by Les Mis, which was probably a huge risk, Les Miserables, in that it had gone on in London in late '85 and transferred to the Palace in December of that year. And we were doing it in 1987 here, November '87. So there wasn't a lot of lead time there, and the word of mouth of Les Mis hadn't really permeated the Australian public at the time. So it was a bit of a risk. But brilliantly, Cameron decided that when it went on sale here, there'd be a preferential period of, because they knew Phantom was coming. So if you wanted tickets to Phantom, you had to buy tickets to Les Mis. And it was done as a joint package for a certain period of time.
Oh, wow.
And that's what kicked Les Mis off, apart from the fact that the production was wonderful when it opened here. Yes, all of those sort of marketing strategies that Cameron and the team bought were quite amazing. It revolutionised the industry here. How to sell a show and promote it.
And around the world, I would.
And around the world, yes. But of course, if you listen to Martin's podcast, it'll give you a blow by blow. But they were getting established in New York and getting an office going there, and Cats was already there, closely followed by Les Mis and Phantom.
What's the story and thinking behind Cameron's not putting names above? There was.
He'd always thought and always maintained that the name of the show was what people came to see. And it may have also had a hidden agenda there where you could say, well, if so-and-so's not on, you're going to see the show but somebody else is playing, and you don't have that complication.
Yeah.
Where nowadays sometimes they'll advertise somebody appearing in a show, and suddenly an audience gets there and finds that he or she is not on, and that can cause huge problems. But I don't think that was the main reason. Cameron always felt that the show was the thing, no matter who was in it. And yes, of course, there was billing under the title of who was there and who wasn't, but that's always been his philosophy. Even recently, with old friends at the Guild in London, it's the Sondheim tribute. There are major stars in that, but the name of the show is Old Friends.
Right.
And Sondheim. So.
But it certainly worked for people and made stars of people.
No, exactly.
Didn't work against it, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think they were stunned. They never said anything to me. They just said, well, my father said, I remember I've got a letter down there that he wrote me saying, with this new job, I want you to find a church and join a church and well, nothing a bit further from my mind doing that. It was completely alien to me, having been at Geelong, where you're in the chapel, 5 days a week and 3 times on a Sunday, singing in the choir, sort of thing. So yeah. I'd had up to there, but at the same time, I knew what he meant, by giving yourself a sort of internal moral compass as to how you conduct your life, But my big regret is that even though I was working for J.C. Williamson's and shows like Man of La Mancha in the 60s and in the early 70s, but they would come and see, they weren't sort of dedicated, we must go to Melbourne to see such and such.
Yeah.
But of course, when I was at Williamson's, I used to get them to come and see the shows, and I remember getting Mum and Dad in to see Man of La Mancha, which the first production of it ever here in the Comedy Theatre, which was fantastic. And my father said that's the most wonderful thing I've ever seen.
Starring
Suzanne Steele as Aldonza, and Charles West, an English actor, as Cervantes, Don Quixote, and an actor called Bobby Healy, who was an old J.C. Williamson guy that had hopped from one show to the other.
Yeah.
He was Sancho. It was a great cast, actually, that original cast. We had Terry McDermott and Norman Yem, a really terrific group of people. The show struggled for business until this publicist called Bill Gordon thought, I've got to get this rolling. So he got Truth newspaper to do this article about girl raped on stage, and this was all to do with the rape scene, the muleteers and Aldonza in the latter part of the show, So that stirred up everything, and people flocked to see, thinking they were going to see something terribly salacious and revealing. Alas and alack, it wasn't. And ours was the original New York version of it, that Williamson's bought the rights and everything else, lock, stock and barrel. The production stage manager, a guy called Marnell Sumner, he came out to direct it, which was really a wonderful experience, seeing how he put it together. And Betty Pounder, of course, did the choreography of the muleteers and musical staging of it. But it was jaw-droppingly wonderful. And lots of funny things happened there. Bobby Healy, who used to be an avid racing, Wednesdays and Saturdays, and be up on stage at one point, doing his bit with Charles West in a transistor radio, fell out of his costume. Hardly in the period.
Were people fined in those days for doing naughty things that?
Yes.
Would he have copped a fine?
Yes, I used to do a bit of that. Late for the half hour, or missing an entrance and all that sort of stuff. It's quite a bit of that.
What kind of stage manager were you? What did they think of you?
It's hard for me to say, but I knew how to do the job.
Strict but fair. Strict but fair.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. But it's a job where you have to have the ability to to deal with problems as they come up in the running of the show and deal with personalities, really. And so I learnt very early in the piece that shouting at them wasn't the answer, you know.
Yeah.
You know, who the fuck do you think you are? That sort of stuff never worked.
Yeah.
Diplomacy was always the
Oh, yeah.
best. But yes, there are some extraordinary experiences with people, you know, the way they conducted themselves, and have drunken stagehands, you know. There was an act at the Tivoli years ago called Marquis and His Chimps, which was an American act of this man called somebody Marquis was his stage name, and he had these trained chimpanzees. And one of the stagehands used to get, when they were being set up at the back and there was a comic on the front saying, ladies and gentlemen, yada yada, and the stagehand at the back would be tickling this male monkey in the genitals to get it overexcited. And of course there'd be this big fanfare and Mr. Marquis had come on and the curtains had opened and there's this monkey having intercourse with another monkey. And Mr. Marquis was very angry. But the stagehands don't do naughty things like that anymore.
No.
But there were other things that went on too that were, you know, really sort of not to wreck the show, but that with the audience, of course, was hysterical. At the Tivoli, we used to have a very basic sound system where I could communicate through a monitor to the sound operator at the back of the stalls, because we used to have 3 mics that the stage manager would pull up on a pulley for someone to come and do something, and then it would drop down and, you know, all of that, off-stage mics. And so, but the showgirls in the shows would be doing, you know, a pretty girl is like a melody, and one of them would come off near the front corner and say, A5, and I'd go get on the intercom to, what's his name, on the back and say, A5, and one of the usherettes would come down, and there's a man giving himself a bit of a titillation in seat A5 under a raincoat or what. I mean, people will think I'm absolutely inventing that, but it's absolutely true. You know, the showgirls and the ballet girls would all be very observant of what was going on there. And of course, in those days, you could have nudes, bare-breasted models and nudes on stage, but they weren't allowed to move. So the trick is you get them to sit on something and you move that, you know, the truck going across or whatever, a bit shaky. And it's like Robert Helpman said years after that, with nudes performing the ballet, I don't think that would work because there are certain parts that don't stop swinging when the music stops. I think at the time I was living in a room in the hotel up in Little Collins Street, like it was called the Hunt Club Hotel, which was a watering hole for everyone who worked at the Tivoli, you know, 6 o'clock closing and all that sort of stuff. It was horrendous. But yes, I used to rent a room there, and sometimes we'd be out in South Yarra. There was the theatrical digs out there, a house where actors and other wayward people would be able to rent rooms, you know, for the season that they were in and all that. So we sort of congregated out there quite a lot. Well, apart from the normal stuff like cinema and the live shows that came in, there were no sort of nightclubs and things, but there were bars and places that you could go congregate and have a drink. And in Exhibition Street, there was a place just up from Her Majesty's, which was run by a Danish couple for years and years, and they used to do late night suppers, and you could get liquor in a coffee cup, little demi-tasse coffee cup, because you weren't allowed to have, you know, all that. But that lasted for years and years in that area. She was just wonderful, catered to the theatre crowd, and it's like Thirsty Thursdays in a way that they have sometimes here and in Melbourne at the Madge, that the theatre community gets together and you could be there till 3 or 4 in the morning, you know. And you know, there were lots of little theatres that were out around South Yarra, St Martin's, and Emerald Hill, and it was sort of the era where Frank Thring had his theatre in the 50s and 60s. But yes, it was still a conservative city, Melbourne, very much so.
Right.
More so than here, you know. And of course you get to places like Adelaide and the main cities in New Zealand that closed down at 6 o'clock, and on a weekend you couldn't get anything, you know. It was all shut up.
Yeah.
And how different it is now. Well, I
Yeah.
came back, when I came back from overseas from the Dunham tour, I was based in the Melbourne Tivoli, but I did a lot of shows there, both reviews and pantomimes, and toured them. Um, there was one that starred Johnny Lockwood called Pardon My French, which went around Australia and New Zealand. Um, another one called Pleasures of Paris, which was anything but, starring Sabrina, 44-inch bust.
Yeah.
That did a tour of Australia and went to New Zealand as well. And it's where I first met Harry Miller on that Sabrina tour, because he was doing publicity at the time, amongst other things. And yes, there was a whole scenario with Sabrina and him and Sabrina's manager, and it was all difficult.
Oh, difficult.
You know, Harry. Yeah. But yeah, so it was actually in 1959 where the producer Tibor Rudis came onto the scene, and he and his wife had a dance studio here in Sydney. It come out as a Tivoli act, in actual fact, called Sugar Bubba and the Rudis Twins, and they were an adagio act, you know, throwing her around a lot. And he set up a dance studio here, and he put together these shows, the first of which opened in Melbourne in late '59. And so I then left the Tivoli and joined him as the sort of production stage manager for Oriental Cavalcade, which was again a review with mostly Asian artists from the Philippines and Japan and China, which toured everywhere. Then he did Ziegfeld Follies, which opened here in Sydney at the Tivoli. And the guest of honour that night, when we opened it, was Billy Berg, who was Florence Ziegfeld's wife. And I don't think she quite knew what was going on, because she was pretty old then, you know. Lovely to talk to for a few minutes, but you know, she would have been well into her 70s, I think. Yeah, so that show sort of toured as well, Ziegfeld Follies, and then Rudis did Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, of course, which was the Disney licensed version, where you could actually use the film script and the dwarfs' names. And that did sensational business, absolutely sensational. Twice daily in Melbourne. Then, of course, you do the review at night as well, so you're actually doing 18 shows a week.
And would you manage all of those?
Yes, yeah. Most of the cast and crew.
This is before unions, of course.
Yeah, well, before there was the power there where you would, I said, you wouldn't be able to ever do that now. But basically, the cast that was in the night review of Ziegfeld Follies also had roles in the pantomime. In Snow White. Little roles, but you know, one of them was the king. Another couple with the mother and father of the children, how the story started, and did a variety act and all that with the violin. But yes, 18 shows a week from Boxing Day till the first week of February. You can imagine what people were like at the end of that.
And real little people?
Oh yes, we had 7 of them, and they all came in from England. All of them. The shortest one was Doc. Mickey Chapman, his name was, and he would have been 3'8". Yes. And the youngest was a boy called Graham Cottrell, who played Dopey, and he would have been. They were all well under 5 feet, and that was the charm of it. People went mad about it.
Yeah.
They were mobbed. Anywhere they went, they were mobbed. And we had the most extraordinary publicity stuff around Australia and New Zealand with them. You know, you'd have to have security virtually to protect them from people wanting to say hello or do other things. You know, they looked after themselves and each other.
Yeah.
Yes, the touring that was extraordinary, because we had 3 different versions of the show. One was the big one, which was the Tivoli and major theatres. Then there was a cut down version where we had another smaller cottage, and then the smaller one was virtually just, odd set pieces if you were in a really tiny town hall. Um, and uh, it was, yeah, there were quite extraordinary things. So we could plan ahead. In other words, if we knew we were going into a smaller venue, the smaller set would go on ahead.
Yeah, yeah.
But I remember once we were in New Zealand, we were playing Wanganui, a little town on the North Island there, and our next date was New Plymouth. And so the show finished, and apparently we were getting the show out onto the truck and everything like that, and a lot of us went on to New Plymouth that night, to set up and do all that. But the scenery truck didn't come in until the following morning, and the company came over by bus, except for one of the dwarfs decided to come over in the truck with the scenery. And so I'm in the theatre, and we've set up and everything like that, and then somebody comes to tell me that one of the dwarfs has been injured. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "This guy, whose name's Herbert Turner, who played Sleepy, apparently was as pissed as a parrot the night before and still hung over the next day, got into the truck with the scenery, opened the door of New Plymouth and fell out and hit his head." And I thought, "Oh, Christ," And so I had to do an announcement that afternoon saying that the show was being retitled Snow White and the Six Dwarfs, sadly because Sleepy couldn't be woken up. The audience went berserk. Could you imagine? I got the words out of my mouth and I could hear the roar from the front. So we dubbed whatever his lines were cut, of course. So the six of them went on, hi ho, across the stage, and Sleepy was back in the hotel trying to sleep it off. But he didn't injure himself. But I mean,
Yeah.
they were heavy party guys. Those boys, they could drink anyone under the table. But it was fun. We had a great time. It was a good team touring with them. Knew what they were going to do. At one time, even I got on as the narrator in one town. And one of the stagehands, because the king was off sick, and he said, "Oh, I know that." He said, "I could do that." And this is a rambunctious stagehand who, do anything. And it's usually the ones tickling up the monkey,
Yeah.
So he makes his first entrance on a bicycle, little bicycle, from prompt side to OP. And he was mugging at the audience as he rode on and rode straight into the proscenium wall on the other side, lifted his toenail off and couldn't perform in the end. Couldn't do it. We had to stop and get somebody else on to read the part. So, shocking things that happen in tiny towns.
Yeah.
But yes, a lot of that, stuff nowadays you wouldn't be laughing. There's no, that humour's all gone out of it. But we had some great times during that show.
Did you ever perform? Was performance ever a thing
I
that?
auditioned
Ah.
at the Princess in Melbourne with absolutely, except the only thing on my CV I could have put down was that I played Mistress Quickly in Henry IV Part 1 at school, where I was terrible. I know. And so somebody said to me, "Oh, there's auditions at the Princess," and Irene Mitchell was directing this play called Tea and Sympathy, which you might be aware of. And so I thought, "Oh, I'll go and have a read for this." It was the schoolboys part in it. And no experience, so I had no idea what I was doing. And so I'm backstage at the Princess and the Sleeks Borders and all that. And there was Noel Ferrier standing on the side because he was playing the lead opposite Dulcie Gray, the English actress, playing the headmaster. And he said to me, he said hello and all that. And he said, "Oh," he said, "if you're lucky enough to get this part, I'll look after you." And I think that completely threw me because I thought that's the last thing I want to have happen. So I get out there and do the audition, and Irene Mitchell says, thank you, John. And that was it. So I used to laugh about this with Neil Fitzpatrick, who got the role. In later years, I said, "You stole that part I was going to get." We used to joke about it a lot. But also Noel, I said to Noel, now I know you better and I know who you are, really. I said, I count myself as being very lucky.
He was a very wicked man.
Oh, it was such fun, Noel. Such fun. Another one that you sort of miss, you know, all those things that come back. But he was a marvellous man, Noel. Very talented. Well, you know, you could television, movies, the stage. Madame Lucy in Irene, he was. Um, he was very naughty in Irene, you know. So some days, like Saturday being a race day, he's in his salon with Pamela Gibbons and he's right down front, almost into the pit. And I said to him one day, "What are you doing in this scene?" You know, I said, "They're all up there. You're upstaging them like man." He said, "It's Rosalie Rosemary, the harpist, in the pits holding up a board with the race results." I said, "You can't do that. Get back up." You know. He said, "Only you would find out." And I said, "The stage managers knew as well. I wasn't stage manager. I was in charge of production there at Williamson's at the time, but he was so naughty. But he's such great fun. Such great fun. I'm sure it's all very straight down the middle now. And that there's probably a great deal of fun. Companies enjoy themselves working together. Some don't, you know. But I don't think it's ever like that anymore, you know. It's just gone.
Were there people in those days who were so dreadful you think, oh, wish I hadn't even had that experience with them? You know, people that you just think, I don't want to be in the same room as. Were they allowed to exist in those days?
Yes, there were some. Some of the Williamson shows used to go from show to show and were, what shall I say, had a reputation and needed to be monitored, you know, in terms of their conduct, what they were doing.
Was that?
The line had to be drawn, you
And how was that handled?
know. Basically sometimes through Betty Pounder. She would be the counsellor as well. If things got too serious, it would be the management, you know, not me. But, you know, someone across the road at the comedy or whatever would be saying, "I want to see you," you know. But the stage director had pretty good control of things in those years, you know. There were,
Yeah.
and yes, a lot of the performers went from show to show in that Williamson era.
Yeah.
You know, look at Nancy. You know, I just saw a photo of her on Facebook this morning in the Brisbane company of My Fair Lady, and I thought she was the only one I recognised. And so, the stage director Ian Roberts used to have pretty good control of all that, all that stuff, and there were no major discipline problems. You know.
Mm.
Whereas, I mean, stories I hear about today of people calling in sick and the next minute they're on Bondi Beach or something, you know, or doing another gig. Just Betty Pounder, well, what a legend she was. I mean, her history is probably well known and well documented, but she was the most amazing lady. She, in the time I knew her, she was firmly established at Williamson's at that time, but she had such a unique ability to go to England or America, and Williamson should have the rights of these shows. But at that time, there weren't the creative deals as there are now. So the royalty holders, being the scenic designer and the lighting designer and yada yada, the sound designer, were all lumped into one deal. And so she had to go and observe all these departments, props and costumes and the lot, to be able to come back and advise the workshops how to get on with them. Sometimes they'd get basic plans. Other times she might pick up a prompt script from somewhere or other information from members of the company that would tell her. But her unique ability to notate all of this and come back and get it going in the Williamson workshops and in the rehearsal room was quite unique. I mean, I don't think anyone could do it today. Mind you, all that's changed, of course, because you now independently have the rights of all those elements to get a production on, which have to be negotiated, you know. But in the days of Williamson's, where they were all powerful, they sort of dictated the terms. basically, um, and whatever the royalty package was divided up by the owners in New York between those participants if they were lucky to have a deal. Um, but yes, um, when Williamson's closed, she virtually went on to the Victorian Arts Centre and started Morning Melodies, which is, around the country these days mostly. She was the initiator of all of that. But a wonderful lady, great sense of humour, didn't mind a glass of white wine. Yeah.
Do I remember that she was? No, did she do some casting for Crawford's at the?
Yes, she was involved. Yes, she was. Yeah.
That's where I met. I did
Yeah.
meet her once in my life,
Yes.
and I.
Yes, that was post Williamson. She was, I think, Crawford's casting director for a while.
Yeah.
I'm not sure for how long or where the sequence of events actually happened, but she was very good at that too. And she was a great encourager of talent. Betty, she could see. Well, Nancy, of course, came up through the ensemble out of Fair Lady into other things before in the 60s, basically. I think it was Pounder who said we don't need to look to bring in an overseas star, because sometimes they were, the road company leading lady or leading man, which is unknown here. And of course, there was a huge outcry about that, and probably quite rightly so, to bring out somebody who the public wouldn't know, and they wouldn't put Australians, didn't have faith that Australians could actually carry the show. But it was Pounder who insisted on both Jewel Perryman and Nancy for Funny Girl and Sweet Charity, respectively. And that decision proved to be spot on. Pounder was she could always see the potential in people for roles that she might have seen in shows overseas. But particularly those two ladies, their careers just, took off.
Was it more than?
Yes, it was the sort of Williamson mantra at the time that if we're doing something, we'll bring in someone to do a play from London. Like they brought out, and I understand they can bring out people like Ralph Richardson or Michael Redgrave because they were major film and stage stars in shows that did very well out here. But musicals, you bring out How to Succeed in Business, for instance, which Nancy was in. They bring out 2 or 3 people from one of the American companies that nobody had ever heard of here. Nowadays, you would never do that because you'd be able to find them. And I think it also goes back to the actual training and the ability for people who are talented to have that opportunity to learn their trade or profession, be given the opportunity here. It's changed a lot over the years, and it's sort of like what's the term? It's like the Australian cringe. Is that the word? Where people are sort of saying, "Oh, we can't do it. We've got to bring someone in. It'll work if we do that."
Yeah.
But all those major shows like South Pacific and How to Succeed, all of those, that they would get the rights of it and they would say, "Okay, we can have so and so from America to do this." Well, Forum. Funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, which I did in 1964. Had 4 leads from overseas.
People we'd never heard of.
No. One you might have, which would have been Richard Walker, who was a great doily cart performer with his wife, and they'd been in a lot of G&S tours for Williamson's before that. He'd be the only one that people would have known. Jack Collins was the American Pseudolus. Jack Gardner was the hero, and they'd worked on stage and all that, and nobody knew them out here. Clifford Mollison was Hysterium. Well, he was a British actor that I wouldn't think many people would know at all, you know. And the one actor that got a major role, that was Bob Hornery, who became Lycus, the keeper of the ladies. That was a fun tour. But of course, here in the 50s, there was no real NIDA or WAPA or anywhere where you could learn the technical side of the theatre whatsoever. So you learnt it on the job, which is basically how I found it when I first started. And it was a lot of information, but it was very valuable. Yeah. And when you went into a management position years later, you had all that experience about how a stage works, how the backstage area works. So there's really nobody who could say, oh, we can't do that because you would have had some sort of experience in actually doing exactly what they said you can't. You know.
So how many years with JCWs?
Me?
Yeah.
I joined them officially in 1964, and I left them in late 1969, where I went to join the Adelaide Festival of Arts, which was the festival. The centre wasn't built at the time. So I don't know whether, because I was stage managing Jewel Perryman and Stephen Douglas in a musical called I Do, I Do at the time. And I remember the guy in charge of production at Williamson's there, Joe White, had a chat to me. He said, oh, there's a job going in Adelaide as technical director of the 1970 festival for Bobby Helpman. Would you be interested? And I thought about it. I thought, well, this could be a stepping stone. Why not? Then sometime later, because at one point during Williamson's, we being the stage managers that worked for the firm, were not being paid a lot of money. And so we decided that we'd get a little group together to lobby Williamson's to, you know, review it and up the salary. And I might have been the leader of this, not you know, sort of mad, waving flags or anything. But so I used to think later that maybe they found this job opportunity to cut off the head of the snake, you know, send him to Adelaide so we won't have any more trouble with any of our people. But so that may have been true, I don't know. But I went to Adelaide then, and for Bobby Helpman's festival, which was huge. Lots of overseas stuff came in, and venues then were primitive. The main feature was the Australian Ballet and Don Q with Nureyev. And then he had the Bunraku puppets from Japan, an Indonesian gamelan orchestra ensemble, which is very noisy.
Yes.
I remember, just an aside there, the lady where we had them accommodated, a motel out in Flinders Street, Kent Town or something, we put them out there, and she rang me frantic. She said, you've got to come out, you've got to come out. And I said, what on earth's wrong? She said, they're shitting in the waste paper bin. And I said, oh dear. So I came out to explain how to use a toilet, you know, because they didn't have running sewage where they came from. That sort of all that went on. And that was a festival where the RSC was playing, doing, I think, and it was Judi Dench was in the company, and that's where she and Michael Williams, her future husband, actually got together and met, you know. But the RSC had come from somewhere else, Melbourne or somewhere like that, and they were performing at Her Majesty's at the time, which was all fine, but accommodation-wise, they were stuck in this terrible accommodation out in the northern part of the city. So we had problems with all of that, you know. And years later, when I met Judi Dench at the Garrick Club or somewhere, I reminded her and said, do you remember Scotty's Motel in Adelaide? She said, oh, yes, I do. She said, you know, we were really up in arms about that. I said, it was a terrible place. So we had to solve them and get some of them out of there and put them, all those sort of things that happened.
Yeah.
The theatre venues were pretty bad. School halls, university theatre, not well equipped or anything like today. But look, the festivals got on and did huge business, you know. And Bobby's festival was probably one of the most successful they ever had. The next one, the '72 festival, which was directed by the guy that was the administrator of the festival, was a big flop and lost a lot of money. And I, together with many others, I couldn't cope with this guy, so I resigned. And when I resigned, Michael Edgley phoned me and said, "We're doing a joint arrangement with JCW, and we're running the ship when we want you to come back in charge of production." You know, so there was he and the old Williamson management, which was a problem. And Sue was there, Sue Natras, God bless her. And I went back. The first thing we did was No Nanette, and then Irene, and then there was Michael Redgrave and Ray Richardson, you know, and Patrick Cargill doing 2 and 2 Make Sex. I mean, can you imagine doing that today? He was a big television star, Patrick.
Yes,
you know,
father, dear father.
Father, yeah. And they were hanging from the rafters, the comedy. Everywhere we went, that show sold out. Well, he was great fun, Patrick.
Was he?
Yes, great fun. Loved life off stage. Lots of stories there. Could be dredged up, but not now.
God.
He always had a fairly fractious relationship with the board at the festival, who he thought didn't know anything about the theatre, and therefore should run the office and not the arts. You know, to quote a line from Phantom. But he, with me, I got on with him really well, you know, what I had to do with him. But he was with the ballet, of course, at the time, as well, doing artistic director of that. But his festival overall was well organised. We had no, what I call major problems. Not having a concert hall in Adelaide was a real problem at that time. And they used to perform out in the Centennial Hall at the Royal Agricultural Showgrounds in Wayville, and that hall was not built for anything like a symphony orchestra. No facilities, nothing. Very difficult. And I think out of that eventually sprang the idea of, we've got to fix this and build a decent art centre.
What made Adelaide take it on in the first place?
What, the festival?
Yeah.
Well, it was a group of Adelaide establishment people, and John Bishop, basically, Professor John Bishop of the university, who said Adelaide's the perfect place for a festival. So the first one, which was 1960, was a very small affair, but it was the only one that was really going anywhere in Australia before the festival of Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne. The only one. And some of that things that they brought in were really terrific. So it grew from that. And then, of course, once the festival centre opened, the two organisations were basically combined and lived in the same premises. And the festival centre trust serviced the needs of the Festival of Arts. And that, you know, festivals are always very risky, but some of them that have been done in Adelaide have been absolutely fantastic, you know, drawing people from around the world to see and to perform in. Yes, Bobby was preoccupied with the ballet, and having Nureyev arrive and all that was a huge sort of event. And you know, the things we heard from Her Majesty's getting Don Quixote with tantrums of the opera going on and throwing things across the stage, Nureyev having a fit and all that. But the show went on, you know, remarkably so. It was a big success.
What's your favourite show?
Oh, well, as I said to you earlier, I think out of all of the shows I've ever seen, Man of La Mancha would be up there, and you'd have to put Les Miserables next to it. I love Miss Saigon. I think it's a terrific score and all of that sort of stuff. And Phantom too, but if you wanted to name two, I'd say Man of La Mancha and Les Miserables. Well, there are lots of others that have been great, you know,
Yeah,
but out in one's memory over a period of 50 years, they're the two.
yeah. What's coming up that you look forward to?
Um, a long pause here.
A long pause.
um, well, one of the, I think I've probably said to you earlier, my association with Miss Saigon has been from 1989 through to today in a way, and particularly involving the Philippines, um, where we first went to audition in the mid-90s, and that's where I wasn't with it, but that's where the team discovered Lea Salonga as the original Kim. And of course, since then, there have been so many uh, Filipinos come out of that country to go into that show, no matter where it has been, America, Canada, um, Manila, England, Europe, here. When we first did the show here in 1995, we had to import 15 people from the Philippines because we simply could not find the talent to do anything of the roles in the show. Nowadays, um, this production that's currently running in Adelaide is no problem whatsoever. The schools and the interest that people have had in music theatre has translated, particularly to Asian artists, into having the ability to do shows like that, you know. And so this production going to Manila will be the cause of a big reunion of alumni of Miss Saigon, ex-cast members, you know, from a friend of mine who was the engineer in America and England and here, who's now getting on but looks wonderful, and to others who have just, you know, come into it recently.
Yeah.
But there's still people around the world that are, you know, still part of it.
It's extraordinary. Like in the last 40 years, like if you were to cast a show with that needed black cast members,
Yeah.
it was a very difficult thing to cast, wasn't
Oh
it?
yes,
You know.
yeah. And the same with, you know, the original version of The King and I.
Ah.
I mean, there were people in that with made up, yes, eyes.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, you might remember the controversy originally of Jonathan Pryce, you know,
Oh yes.
English performer, terrific actor,
Yeah.
being Asianed up to play the multiracial engineer, and the controversy that caused over the particularly in New York, where Cameron actually had an advance of between 25 and 30 million US dollars, and American Equity refused to give Jonathan Pryce a work permit to come in because of, you know.
Did he get it in the end?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Cameron cancelled, and that was the trigger. Equity caved in. And so they should have, you know, it's ridiculous.
Mm.
And there was a push of, you know, Asian actors, and I can understand that. But in the end, Jonathan Pryce won every award possible for portraying that. But now you would not put a non-Asian, Caucasian actor playing that role on a main stage production. You wouldn't do it.
Oh, what a different world we live in now, you know.
Yeah. But it's great, you know, you can just see that the explosion of talent in Asian performers, and also, you know, people from New Zealand, like Pacific Islanders, etc., who are all, you know, very, very competent going into these shows where the requirement might be not necessarily colourblind casting, you know, that you have to say, okay, they're the people for the job and we can do it. And I think that's part of the reason why this production of Saigon is so good, because that's been done exactly right. You know. And that's the key to anything. And I know, you know, the first thing Cameron would say, that I'm not doing anything unless I've got the casting right. And that's his first port of call. Yes, sometimes it doesn't work. Faye Dunaway, for instance, in Sunset Boulevard in America, quite some years ago. You must have heard that story.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Patti LuPone opened Sunset Boulevard in London,
yeah.
and apparently was promised that she would open Broadway. Then they decided to do the production in Los Angeles, and so they found another Norma, which turned out to be Faye Dunaway, but she never got to see the light of day because they suddenly discovered that she couldn't sing it. And that's when Glenn Close stepped into the role, and then Glenn Close took it into Broadway at the same time that Lloyd Webber had promised Hattie that she would open Broadway as well. So there was a little tantrum about that.
Who opened it?
Glenn Close did.
Ah.
And Patty got a new swimming pool and a kitchen or something.
I'd forgotten all of that.
Yes.
But how did Faye Dunaway even get to that point, you'd think?
I honestly don't really know. There's probably a
Yeah.
book about it somewhere.
There must be somewhere.
Yeah, there is something about it. I've seen it somewhere. But maybe they have a great idea in a way, but you would have thought that she would have been taken through the score to see whether she had the vocal chops to do it. I don't know what went wrong there.
Is there someone that goes, just steps out all the time?
I suppose one of them would be Leia Salonga, whose vocal ability is next to none. I mean, she could sing anything.
Yeah.
Male-wise, I would have thought that in Australia particularly, I mean, I had a great admiration for Rob Guest as Valjean and the Phantom. I mean, he was, and Rob started off as a lounge singer in Vegas, you know, all those years ago, and then went on to do a lot of stuff in New Zealand, musical stuff in New Zealand. But he was consistently good and a great company member, great leader of a company he was. And anything that is a long run, you need that person. Or it could be two, but you need one person who is the anchor of the company. And Rob, bless him, was certainly all of that. And there have been others, of course, who've been terrific performers, but out of all of them, I would have thought, to me, Rob Guest was really special. And yes, and you know, there are great characters, like, I mean, dear John Ewing, you know, in Phantom, with all the health problems he had. And I remember saying to him earlier that I said, this show is your superannuation. I said, don't ever leave it. But throughout that run, this 5.5, 6 year run of it, we'd made arrangements, you know, for him to suit him to have 6 months out, and he went off to Europe or do whatever and come back into it. So I said to him, anytime you want to do this, just tell us with enough notice. We can bring in, you know, Louis Viander or David Whitney or Martin Croft or whoever, you know, and so he did that until he was touring right up to the end. He performed the last performance of that company in Perth in August '99, and it opened in December 1990. So he retired with a good, sizable handbag full of money, theoretically speaking. But, yes, I mean, you know, and John, being through that original Hayes Gordon program, where he started before the ensemble really became an entity, right, with Hayes with these acting classes when he was here doing Kismet or whatever. At the time, same time that Dunham was at the Tivoli, Kismet was up at the Empire in Railway Square, which is the old Her Majesty's. And yes, I used to take notes from Miss Dunham up to Hayes at the other theatre and wait for a reply and come back. So I think there was something going on there, but I wasn't sure what.
Intrigue.
Yes, a short walk up the hill. Not you again. Yes, there's been many characters. throughout. But it's a remarkable industry, you know. I mean, it goes up and down like a yo-yo, and there's money and funding and things that don't do well, but it'll never die.
No.
It'll never die. It'll always be around in some form, you know. And I don't mean, you know, big lavish $12 million musicals, just everything that everyone's doing, you know, busy.
Mm.
And I'm sure COVID sort of knocked the industry pretty badly in terms of personnel, work-wise and all that. But like all these things, it seems to rebound. And
And I think especially when there's so many shows aimed at kids now,
yes,
you've got your audience,
Yeah,
your
yeah.
immediate audience, and you're building
Yes.
an audience for the future. You
Yes.
know, everyone wants their children to have that memory of
No,
of going
exactly.
to a show, don't they?
Exactly. Yes, looking ahead, there's, you know, a lot of revivals, of course, trotting them out.
Yeah.
But Chicago seems to be doing pretty well in Brisbane and very popular, so that'll be worth having a look at. Well, I'm sort of out of touch because I know what's playing in New York and what's been on in
Yeah.
London and whatnot, but it's very hard to say what shows would suit audiences out here.
Out here.
I mean, I understand Back to the Future is going to be rolled out here at some stage, you know.
Yeah.
And I see Neil Gooding's bringing in, can't remember the name of it now. Is it, yes, The Woman in Black play. It's like one of the Agatha Christie things.
Oh, the horror, the
Yeah.
ghost story.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw it.
The Ghost Story.
I went with Marianne Rolfe, funnily enough, in London to see it.
Yeah, it was at the Fortune Theatre in London for years.
Scared the hell out of me.
Daniel Radcliffe was in the movie.
Yes, that's right. It's a spooky movie too.
Yes. Is it John Waters? And Daniel McPherson are doing it.
Ah.
Neil Gooding. And someone, Teresa Ball sent me a message saying they went to see Operation Mincemeat at the Fortune in London, and that how good it was. And I read somewhere someone's got hold of that. You know what that is?
No.
It's a World War II story where the British decide to try and fool the Nazis as to where the invasion would be, so they get a dead body and put it in the sea with a lot of false information, making them think that it was going to be in Sicily or somewhere, and it wasn't. It was France. It was a movie, and it was called. It wasn't Operation Mincemeat. It was, and I thought Clifton Webb was in it actually, the original movie. I can't think of the name of it. I was going to say The Man Who Knew Too Much, but it wasn't that.
No. I'll be looking that up tonight.
Yes.
Yes.
So, you know, there's stuff out there that I think Australian audiences would like. It's commercially, it's a very tough decision-making time, you know. And for instance, A Christmas Carol, which was on in Melbourne, did you see that?
No, I didn't.
I went. That's one of the things I saw when I went down in December. It was wonderful.
I heard.
Great evening out, fabulous company, led by Owen.
I love that actor. He's
Owen Teale.
Owen Teale, yeah.
Out of Game of Thrones, really commanding presence, and that National Theatre RSC thing about British actors, you know. Yeah. He was terrific, but a great company. I hope it's going to be done up here at some stage. You know, I've been here since 1998. A long time ago.
Wow.
And that's when I was living at East Point Tower, and I'd sold my Adelaide house and thought, well, I've got to get something to stay here in Sydney. And I was at the time also the Macintosh office had closed here, and I was on a retainer as being one of the two directors of Cameron's company, which was still active. So I was kept on, which was very nice, very welcome.
Thank you very much.
We used to have a board meeting by phone every month, Rob McCormack and I.
Yeah.
yes, I approve the minutes, whatever they are, sort of thing. But no, the Cameron's company was reasonably active at that time, although not producing anything. But so I found a real estate agent who said, and I said, this is what I want. And he showed me a couple of places that didn't have secure parking, didn't have um, 2 bedrooms, which I needed. A couple of places in Rushcutters Bay, and I said, look, these are not what I'm looking for. I said, yes, it is an apartment. But so he said, oh, there's this place down on South Dowling Street. And I said, if you're thinking about those dog boxes which are over there, fronting South Dowling, no, I'm not. And he said, no. He said, this is a brand new development. It's still building. He said, but the one I'm going to show you is actually finished. And so he brought me here, and on this level there were 3 apartments available, one right down that far end, another one right on the other end, which is the morning sun and the afternoon sun beating on you, or this. And so that day when he showed me, I gave him $1,000 as a deposit and said, let's proceed. I got a mortgage pretty quickly, which after the Macintosh settlement I'd paid off.
Yeah.
So I've had it freehold for a long time, but I'm now think I'm not earning any money really. I've got a reverse mortgage on it, which is...
That's what you've got to do. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So, touch wood, it won't be my problem to deal with. Now it's all over, you know. But no, I adore living here. It's so convenient. Coffee shops, 2 downstairs that operate. Coles across the back, Aldi across the road, and a number of restaurants still in Dank Street, which isn't as vibrant as it used to be.
No,
down
it
here in Waterloo.
went away very quickly, didn't it?
Well, they demolished a lot of stuff and just put up apartments in their place.
No.
That whole atmosphere is gone.